A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, a special edition.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 64. I'm your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, John Llewellyn. Hello, John.
Hello.
You ready for some Star Wars talk?
Yeah, let's talk some Star Wars.
God, we have a lot of stuff. I feel like, we almost paid a strange price for that 2-week break, but we were back.
Yeah.
We talked a lot about... What did we talk about last week?
Well, we talked about the Darth Vader comic.
Oh, yes.
And the Darth Vader comic coming to an end. Last week, we also talked about, what's his name? Donald Glover as young Lando.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Because I spend a lot of time thinking about Lando as a character, and I have a lot of things to say about Lando as a character, so I talked a lot about that.
Yes. So, I mean, we still left a lot on the proverbial bone.
Not on the old agenda.
The agenda. So we've got John he went and read the new Ahsoka novel. He's going to talk about that. I watched the new international trailer that I think came out today. John, I think John's going to hold back on that one because
I think at this point we're like just over a month out from Rogue One, and I think I'm good on seeing, and like I've learned as much as I want to learn about this movie before I go see it. So yeah,
I mean we're 35 days, 9 hours or something. I mean it depends on when it's gonna show. Have you heard any rumors about tickets? Because
no, that's a good question. I guess Thanksgiving would be a time that makes sense.
Yes,
to open that up where everyone's around and home and with their family, and you could just turn around and go, who wants Rogue One tickets? And then
you're all getting Rogue One tickets. You get one and I get one.
Yeah. But that seems late. That's only a couple of weeks beforehand. So
I wonder if they're a little worried about just kind of what are they, consumer confidence or interest?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they've been trying to temper expectations for ticket sales for this movie for a while anyway. So I wonder if they're, part of their intentional strategy all along has been, let's not treat this like Episode 7. Episode 7 was its own thing for a lot of reasons. Right. The first new Star Wars movie in, over a decade. So I wonder if for this one they're like, all right, we'll back off a little bit. We'll be a little more circumspect. We'll be a little, we won't push it quite as hard. We're not going to flood the market with Rogue One stuff. We'll be a little more reasonable in when we release these tickets. That way we avoid stories of like, it's a week before Rogue One has come out and none of the shows are sold out. What does that mean about, whether the movie is a failure already before it's even in theaters? They want to avoid those kinds of stories. So I think if they wait a little bit longer to release tickets, then they can maybe avoid some of that potential press.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, like I said, I'll just go into a little bit of the talk, the non-spoiler talk about this international trailer. I think, I'd said, feels like 6 months ago, but I think it was about a month ago. And we had kind of done the final trailer, and I think where I kind of had left at it, I was kind of in a weird place, personally, about just the kind of, because just to reiterate, I tend to get very I mean, there's no other word to use it to describe it. I get emotional about a new Star Wars trailer, and I always have. It's kind of weird. Even when we were in the depth of the prequels, and people are like, everybody is like, Star Wars sucks now. I would still get excited about the trailers, and so that's just kind of part of my thing. Even special editions, blah blah blah. And then to be kind of left a little bit underwhelmed by a trailer and not get that. It kind of, made my confidence kind of go down. Like, maybe that in an attempt to try to create almost a parallel brand of Star Wars movies that somehow they missed it. They're like an X factor. Cause I couldn't really sit there and tell you, this is why I don't feel anything, about this trailer. So it's almost like that thing, the missing X factor. But the funny thing is the more as I go on Twitter, and the Star Wars people that we follow on Twitter, and I kind of read their reactions, it's like, they're not getting that same kind of feeling. A lot of them still have that same kind of enthusiasm for it.
Sure.
So it's kind of like, it might just be me kind of situation where it's just like, oh, it's just me. But I would say that this new trailer is very, as far as Star Wars trailers go, I would call it an unconventional Star Wars trailer, not because anything other than it just doesn't feel like Star Wars. It just feels much more like a straight ahead fantasy, sci-fi, adventure kind of. They're not trying to hold anything back anymore. At least this is a Japanese trailer.
Right.
Because at the end, it's the Star Wars Japan's website, the .jp site. So I don't know how they market movies in Japan. If people are like, hey, I gotta see everything out. You got to put it all on the table, or we're just not going to go. Whereas in the past, at least, American trailers were always like, I always think back to a trailer that I never experienced, but I would say that would be probably a quintessential artistic trailer is like, when Alfred Hitchcock did a kind of a weird trailer for the movie Psycho, where he actually, I think he only shows one brief frame of the film, and he's on set, but he's walking around it, and he kind of jokingly, playfully goes, now not to say that a Star Wars movie would be done like that, but
right.
I'm saying that's the kind of one where they just drag, kind of string you along and give you a little taste. This one is very out there, in even so much as way more than anything that we've seen in the US. And like I said, I won't spoil it, but it's like a lot of kind of like little things that I think, at least in my feeling, would been better served revealed in the movie. But I just wonder if maybe, internationally speaking and US speaking, that they can't afford to do that this is such a new brand in a way. Cause it looks like Star Wars. I mean, the music, I haven't heard a lot of it, it's good. I haven't heard what Michael Giacchino, it's like, I don't know if it sounds like Star Wars. I mean, it almost feels, if you look at like the, costume design, obviously because it's set before episode 4, but I mean, if you look at the way the actor's hair is styled, and it almost looks more like a Star Wars film than even the Force Awakens would, if you look at it kind of with the critical eye, the kind of the attention to detail, the this and that and the just the kind of like, and I don't want to go off on a tangent about The Force Awakens so long after it's come out, but it's just one of those things, when I revisit it, it just becomes one of those things where it's like, they did cut some corners, kind of idea of like the level of detail and sets and stuff. I would actually consider it to be more, at least The Force Awakens, be more akin to some of the prequels, where it's like the backgrounds are kind of out of perspective, where it's like, and I know that they're trying to move away from this used universe, and to do this, they have to do Rogue One. They have to go step back into the used universe, where I just feel like a lot more sets and things are like kit bashed, even down to characters, obviously like the Two Tubes twins or whatever, wearing like a, a weird respirator that looks like it's off a TIE pilot or something.
Right.
I mean, those are just the kind of things that the little touches and, like that's the way Star Wars always is. Like you look at the cantina scene and you look at the lights and then you realize, oh, they had that's IG-88's head, that kind of thing when they reuse it. Whereas I didn't feel like The Force Awakens quite had so much of that, even though they did the little touches of the, the refuse of the Battle of Jakku and whatnot. But maybe all that used universe stuff I'm talking about, I feel like maybe they poured it all into the design of the Millennium Falcon.
Yeah.
It's like the Millennium
in The Force Awakens, you mean?
Yeah. It's like the idea where you're like looking at it and it's like, they're like, oh wow, there's actually like, you get to see more, there's more detail in the Millennium Falcon in some ways than there ever has been. It's like you get to see doorways in up close and like you go, hey, look, there's like telephone wire junctions, bolted into it and, clips and stuff. But, God, I'm really going off I'm kind of fighting a cold, people. So guys, just bear with me.
No, that's fine. I guess I will say, I mean, especially with the way that they wanted to create, new stormtroopers and have in The Force Awakens and have the stormtroopers resemble, Apple products essentially.
Right.
That does kind of take away from the used universe feel. And even though they were on that junk planet and, Maz's castle, Raz's bar has been around for thousands of years and all that. I mean, there is a sense, I mean, it's interesting. This kind of ties maybe into something that we can talk about with the Poe Dameron comic, right? But there's a sense that a lot of, and I think you talked about this last week too, right? That the idea that a lot of the First Order, it's like newly built or newly constructed, and maybe same with the Resistance, right? They have like new X-wings,
right.
Or who knows within the universe how new they are, but it's a different design than we saw in Jedi. And you talked about this last week, this idea that, maybe the First Order should have been using, either Imperial or Rebellion cast-offs and brought the used universe in that way. So here in Rogue One, I mean, yeah, obviously they're going back to that time where, the Republic has been gone for a long time, for almost 2 decades, and everything's kind of run down again. It also raises an interesting question for the young Han Solo movie, because that is, depending on where in the timeline they put that, they'll sort of be straddling the prequel era and the, used universe look of Episode 4. And so, how much of those kind of very ornate clothing styles and the silly hats and robes and things of the prequels, how much of that shows up in the young Han Solo movie? We could be saying something similar about this, of like, well, is this really that kind of Star Warsy used universe look, or how does this fit in with the visual language, the visual piece of what we understand Star Wars to be? And obviously with the prequels, depending on who you talk to, right, Star Wars can be lots of things. It doesn't just have to be that used universe look. So yeah, I mean, it's something that I think visually they're going to have to manage, and it seems like they're trying to keep continuity in, to the extent that they can anyway. They're trying to keep some continuity in the production department and the design departments. And so you'll have, these designers and these concept artists kind of shifting back and forth between time periods within the universe and, okay, how old and how kind of run down do we want to make this one look versus that one, even within, similar time periods. And so, yeah, it's going to take, it's going to take some managing to get those looks right.
Correct. Yeah, and I guess my takeaway from the trailer is even though it kind of it seems like they're actually making the story a little bit more complex than I thought it was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I'm still not necessarily getting the tingles, but I think that is such a thing where it's like, I shouldn't even complain because I have to take a step back and realize it's like I'm getting another Star Wars movie and like with technically in under a year. I mean, my point is that I had The Force Awakens on the 18th of December. Now it's like 2 days short of a year. I'm getting another one, and even if this one isn't like everything I want it to be, as long as it's decent, it don't really matter because in like another year we're getting like a true saga film.
Right.
Or, whatever the Disney version of a saga film is. Cause it's like I'm so curious about where they're going to go with that. It's like, I'm almost more curious than any of these standalone movies. Cause it's like, I feel like by their very nature, they're going to have to be experimental, but not too, they're going to have to be brand loyal as far as Star Wars. I think they can mess around with some stuff, but yeah, I mean, everybody, this whole like, oh, it's like a, episode 8 is like a indie film and all this stuff. And you're like, well, geez, is that going to, is James Spader going to show up at the end of this one? Is it Sex, Lies, and Videotape in space?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess really it's like, I don't really know what my point is, but I'm still not feeling it 100%, but I also have to realize it's like, this bountiful riches we have, it's like it's really hard to complain if it doesn't quite. I mean, like I said, a lot of peers in the in fandom are very excited, and maybe it's because it's so close or something, and and it's like, I don't know. It's it's like maybe it's because go ahead.
That kind of points to something else too, which is, for a while we were just getting kind of the Star Wars that we got, occasional novels and comic books. And I think among the fans, I mean, especially post prequels, there's this push like, it's all Star Wars. And you have to like and accept, all of it because it's all Star Wars. And then to a certain extent that kind of shifted and became like, well, you don't have to, just because you don't necessarily have to like the prequel era, but you have to recognize that it's all Star Wars and that there are other people who do like it. And with the films, I wonder if that's just going to kind of reinforce that or even push that out towards more casual fans where, maybe you don't go see every Star Wars movie or you don't have to be excited about every Star Wars movie, but you're like, oh, if you love The Force Awakens, then, you'll be excited for episode 8 and episode 9. Whereas if you really like the prequels, then maybe you'll be more excited for the Han Solo movie and you won't care as much about, Rogue One. And I certainly, there are going to be people who are excited about all of those things. But I do wonder if we'll get to a point where, it'll cross over from the books and the comics to the movies as well, of like, well, you'll kind of pick and choose what you are excited and enthusiastic about rather than having to feel like you need to kind of be up for all of it.
Right.
Which I mean, it seems like Rogue One is kind of the first place where that's starting to shift, where you do have people who are super excited and super into it. And then you have others like yourself. And I'm not sure where I fit in this right now, but I probably move back and forth between them. But, maybe more cautiously optimistic or, okay, I'll withhold judgment until I actually see it rather than like getting super pumped about it. Like, yeah, we're going to go back to the original trilogy era. It's like, well, maybe that's good. Maybe we need to leave that alone and just keep going with this new, First Order Resistance era,
Yeah. And also I keep every time, of course it's only a trailer. So, but now that we've raised this specter of, again, the specter of the reshoots, it makes me wonder if like they're really kind of when they say, oh, it's just mostly talking in cockpits, but I was like, well, how would something like that really affect an overall thing? And I wonder if maybe a little bit of it has to do with the characterization of Jyn Erso, because in the early trailers, I feel like she was portrayed as more of a kind of a loner that doesn't play well with others and doesn't really is suspicious of organization, like the rebellion even. But now in these other trailers, she's more adamant. She's the person who's doing the convincing of people. We don't know who she's convincing, but it's like, at least in the and I don't consider this a spoiler, but I will say that that whole rebellions are built on hope line, at least when it was first shown, it kind of looked like she could be standing anywhere. But in this international trailer, it's more explicit that she's actually addressing the entire gathering on what we suspect is Yavin 4. And I think that was reused in the other teaser too. So,
and I mean, even more than that too, I think, right? Those very first glimpses that we got, she was being brought in handcuffs before Mon Mothma, and then Mon Mothma's like, "We have a mission for you," and she's kind of surprised, right? So you get the sense that, the rebellion is like, she's too dangerous for the rebellion, and they need to keep her in handcuffs. And this is like, like you said, they're picking some loner who makes trouble, and they're bringing her into the rebellion, and then more recently, we've seen, she got arrested by the Empire, and then the rebels broke her out of prison. So it's not necessarily entirely different, but the tone of it is certainly different. And so you're right. I think people's perceptions of who Jyn Erso is and what her role is in this movie really have changed a lot over the course of the promotion of this film.
Yeah, it's kind of funny too, because I was kind of looking forward to kind of, a cinematic equivalent to the expanded universe character Kyle Katarn from the, just the idea is like, I don't play by your rules or whatever. But, I think we're going to get a little bit of that, and then they're just going to quickly, it'll just go to like, we're the good guys and they're the bad guys. And, I think Star Wars works better like that anyway. I mean, at least it makes me wonder, because like the way that the early shots of now I'm blanking on Saw Gerrera, Forrest Whitaker with his short haircut and trim goatee, which we still haven't established because he hasn't shown up in looking like that in any subsequent depictions, that I feel like maybe that was a maybe they went back and they reshot it, like, Saw's more of a circumspect old warrior rather than this angry militant. It'll be interesting. I would love, and I know it's never going to happen, I would love, after they release the Blu-ray and the thing, that instead of doing just kind of this cursory release of, a little bit of commentary and some extras and some deleted scenes you've already seen, why don't they just break tradition and say, hey, we're gonna release, the original cut of the film, and with all the, because we had it a little different, we didn't like it, and so we changed it, but
right.
I mean, Star Wars is too big to have that. I mean, you can find a work print of Waterworld anytime you want if you go deep enough. You're not, because it was a failure, but.
Well, and who knows, 30 years from now, the Disney Vault could open, and we could get some of those extras, some of those, original shots, original scenes that got edited, and get it now before it goes back in the Disney Vault.
Yeah, don't make me wait 30 years, man. I'm not as young. I'm not that young.
Whatever. I mean, it's so, I don't know, 10 or 20, 10 or 15.
I just as a quick aside, I was going to say this at the top of the show. Not only do I normally feel old on this show, I feel extra old today because my little brother, my only little brother, has turned 40 today. So it's kind of like, But I will say, just a quick aside, a shout out to my brother Andrew.
Yes,
turned 40 today. So he used to be my Star Wars buddy until he grew up and became an adult and said, like, I didn't really like those prequels. Yeah, I mean, he's not so much into Star Wars anymore. But hey, that's the price you pay sometimes for growing up. Anyway, but I get what you're saying. They might bring out something like. They might bring out something in the. I love that kind of stuff, and Disney is really good about being a steward of their past, even if they're very I think they're very connected to like sensitivities about some of their older works that they don't necessarily want to put out. But yeah, stuff like deleted scenes. I mean, I'd love to hear, they did like, it's so funny thinking about how they own Star Wars now when, almost 38 years ago, they tried to rip off Star Wars famously by making the big bomb of a movie, the Black Hole.
Yeah, that's right.
It's like, it took them 40 years to figure out, like, why don't we just buy Star Wars instead of trying to remake it?
Yeah.
But anyway. So, yeah, what is some of that poster art? Yeah, what did you think about some of those new poster arts?
We got some new posters, or I guess it's like two posters that if you combine them, it creates one scene. And it's the scene of, they're on the beach and the rebels are running out towards the water and the stormtroopers are coming in from the water towards the shore. So I guess they took that and they kind of split it up into two posters. I mean, I think it's fine. That's clearly, one of the iconic images that they're relying on from this movie. It's shown up in other posters as well. The only weird thing about it, and I mentioned this on Twitter, but on the Rebels half of the poster, or on the Rebels poster, they're all running kind of right to left. And so they're all facing left, except for Donnie Yen, whose like body is turned so that he's facing out towards you. Like as you're looking at the poster, like Donnie Yen's looking back at you, but he's the only one doing that. It's such a weird effect of like, is this intentional, or could they just like not change it, or why couldn't find a shot of him facing the same way as everyone else, or did they do it just to like break up the thing a little bit, but it's just a really weird effect of like, why is Donnie Yen staring at me?
Yeah, I mean,
this poster.
I think, yeah, and the blind guy's looking at us. It's kind of like the thing. It's like, why did they have a razor tie into a company where everybody is like has beards and stubble? Right. The only thing I could say, and I have no confirmation on this, is like maybe because Donnie's technically he's the biggest star in the movie.
He is.
If you just do per capita, I mean, he's huge. He's way bigger, and obviously in China, but he's catching up here.
He's the biggest name.
I just saw him in something else that has a big part in a U.S. action.
He's in the next XXX movie. They're making another XXX.
Okay, maybe that movie. Maybe I just kind of like showed my my movie taste by thinking that was considered a big movie.
I mean, it might be. I mean, what's his name? Vin Diesel's in it.
The D's.
Yeah.
I honestly kind of was like, I'm really shocked that they're bringing that back, because they killed him off in the second one because he famously didn't want to do it, because he was kind of like flying high.
Well, was that the one with Ice Cube?
Yeah, and it's really bad.
Yeah,
so bad. It's kind of like it has about the same production quality as the first G.I. Joe movie, where you're just like, hey, there's like CGI like robot men in it or something.
Right.
I was thinking about this though the other day, that like if for some reason they had gone like in a kind of like, I don't know, some like less I don't know. I don't even know what the word is. I'm blanking on it. But if like a company had bought Star Wars that wasn't Disney, and like Lucas just kind of haphazardly sold it, like, oh, we're selling it to Universal, just kind of like, they offered me the most money. I don't care. I'm done with this. And then he leaves. I honestly had this vision. It's like, yeah, what they would like literally just have stunt casting, like Vin Diesel as Kylo Ren.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it would be I mean, again, I'm sure if you subscribe to the idea that, every decision, the multiverse decision, that every decision branches off to a new reality, there is some reality in which Vin Diesel is out there promoting his episode 7 reveal as a character.
Yeah.
Oh boy, I'm off in the weeds today. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's right. The promotion for this movie, it definitely feels different than it did for episode 7. Because even, they're bringing new teasers and trailers and posters, but it's, I feel like with the teasers we got for episode 7, even as we got closer to the movie, we would see stuff that we haven't really seen before. Like not not just in terms of, oh, here's the same dialogue scene, but you get to see a different shot, so you get to see who Jyn Erso is talking to, right? But with episode 7, when they had those really short teasers, it was the shot of all the First Order TIE fighters and ships arriving on Takodana,
right?
Overhead of Rey, which we had never seen that before, or the TIE fighter, against the sunset, which we had never seen. We hadn't seen up to that point. They were still finding. I mean, they were still repeating some footage, but I feel like they were still finding these little moments to kind of hint at. Whereas here, like there's pretty much a structure to these trailers and to what they're showing us. We're getting the beachfront battle visually and the Death Star silhouette. We're getting Krennic in his cape, and we're getting Jyn Erso's kind of inspirational speech, and that's right. And we're getting all of those different things. We're getting those three things in slight variation and maybe slightly different shots or slightly different cuts of those three things, but we're essentially getting those three things. So the marketing of this does seem it does feel different than the marketing for episode 7.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely the aspect of I think maybe they're trying to downplay the concept of surprise. It's like, don't come here expecting like I am your father and that kind of level of like a Star Wars movie where there's the big reveals of secrets and stuff. I think that even with this international trailer, the disclosures of some of the things, briefly, it kind of shows like, oh, they might be telling a very linear story, even though it's going to be, I don't know if there's going to be flashbacks or flash forwards or whatever. I mean, I don't. We know that there is a young Jyn. We know that Jyn's mother has been cast. There's some confusion as to like, where some of the quick shots of Orson Krennic and Galen Erso are in the timeline. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's why I'm getting a different feel off. There's a lot less kind of mystery about it. It's much more straightforward, and maybe that they find that that's the best way to kind of market a movie like this, rather than trying to like build up this like, who's this going to be? And they're like, yeah, we're pretty much giving you everything out here. We're so confident about what we're presenting as a straightforward kind of, little rebellion against the big bad guys kind of story, that we don't need to enshroud it with a this is really a story about fathers and daughters, or this is really a story about people turning the back on one life and going into the next one. I mean, we don't even know. It'll be interesting because it's kind of like we don't know what's going to happen to these characters, save for whoever spoiled it at Comic-Con or whatever. It's like there's been, they haven't slowly tried to integrate a lot. Well, that's not true, because Poe Dameron comic has a little thing in there that they've started to integrate some of the Rogue One stuff into the timeline. But, we don't know if Jin's going to make it out of this. We don't know what happens to any of the characters. We just, so I guess that's where the mystery is at. That's the mystery of a Star Wars film post, A New Hope. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, makes
sense to me.
Okay, so do you want to jump into your Ahsoka review? Or
okay. So as Robert mentioned, I have read the Ahsoka novel, and I talked about it briefly last week. But the short review is that I really liked it. I thought it was very good. I was going into it, I was a little worried that it would be closer to Dark Disciple, which I did not really care for. Dark Disciple was a novel based on a series of Clone Wars scripts, unproduced Clone Wars scripts. And, it's Ahsoka. I knew it would be about her time after the Clone Wars, kind of in between the Clone Wars and Rebels, but I didn't know if this was also going to be based on some unpublished stories. And it sounds like I don't think any scripts directly played into this, but at Comic-Con or was it earlier than that? One of the big conventions, there was a panel on like Ahsoka's untold stories, I think, and it was Dave Filoni and Ashley Eckstein and someone else, I can't remember who, talking about sort of what would have happened to Ahsoka, what the Clone Wars TV show would have shown Ahsoka doing if the Clone Wars hadn't been canceled. And, some of that was she stayed on Coruscant and now she had to make a life for herself, without revealing that she was a Jedi. And basically she'd, been living in the Jedi Temple and among Jedi her whole life. And so she had to learn how to survive on the outside world, and especially on, the lower levels of Coruscant. And so I didn't know whether this book would be something along those lines, but it's actually more of a prequel to Rebels in a lot of ways. It's really the story of how Ahsoka becomes Fulcrum. So it's a prequel to like season 2 of Rebels. And as I said, it's basically the origin story of Fulcrum. And so when the book kind of moves back and forth between kind of 2 planets, for the most part, she's hiding out the book opens, she's hiding out on this planet. It's run by a family who owns the biggest kind of port or, spaceport, I guess, on the planet. They do mostly legitimate business. They maybe do a little smuggling on the side. She's hiding out there, working for them as a pilot. Concealing her identity. It's interesting though, her alternate identity or her alternate name that she uses for herself is Ashla, which there are numerous instances of Ashla in Star Wars. Ashla was kind of Lucas's, maybe not original name, but his name for the light side of the Force. And in Rebels now you've heard the Bendu talking about the Ashla and the Bogan. Yeah,
that's his original, at least up to the first scripts. That was
the Journal of the Wills version of light side. And then I think there's a character, there was a Jedi named Ashla, either in the Clone Wars or in some of the novels or comic books from that era, who also was a Togruta like Ahsoka. So I don't know if this was supposed to be, they don't ever explain it where she got the name from or why she took that particular name. So I don't know if this was supposed to be her nodding to the light side of the Force kind of name, or her knowing this other Togruta Jedi and just taking her name and hoping that no one knew that she was a Jedi. They don't ever explain which that is. But anyway, so the family on this planet, they have a very young daughter who we learn is Force sensitive, and so Ahsoka, for part of the novel, she's kind of torn because she needs to hide her identity, but at the same time she feels like she needs to protect this young girl because she knows the Empire, might take her away from her family if it comes to that. The Empire starts showing up a little more and asking questions at the port, and so Ahsoka leaves and goes to another planet, more of an agricultural planet, where she sets up like a machine repair shop to repair, all the agricultural machines, farming equipment, and things like that. And she makes friends on that planet. And, but some kind of lower level Imperial administrator notices this planet and thinks, this would be great to produce agriculture and to produce food for, this burgeoning Imperial army or navy that we have. And so they start cracking the whip on that planet and increasing the amount of shifts and increasing security. And so Ahsoka's friends kind of start planning like, okay, well, how can we sort of get the Empire out of here, or what can we do to, try to get the Empire off of our planet? So she kind of helps them with that, but then they take it too far and some of them get, arrested, abducted. And so at that point, she's already left and gone back to that first planet because she's worried about this little girl. And so she basically spends the novel kind of traveling back and forth between these 2 planets. But meanwhile, she goes back to that first planet. She works as a pilot again for this family. But then while she's out on her her deliveries, some of which she kind of knows what's happening, some of which she suspects that maybe, this family is helping groups around the galaxy or around the system, wherever they are, delivering food supplies and medical supplies and things like that. She also kind of takes it on herself to start doing these kind of goodwill missions, or if she hears, a plea for help, or if she hears of a planet that is, in need of medical supplies or something, she'll kind of take it on herself to facilitate those things. So eventually she goes back to that second planet, the agricultural planet. She rescues her friends. But then an Inquisitor shows up. Actually, I think it's sixth brother, I want to say. Not one of the Inquisitors who is on Rebels, okay. At least not yet, but the same idea. One of those other Inquisitors kind of is tracking her down. Or I can't remember if the Inquisitor tracks her down or tracks the little girl, but I think it's Ahsoka that he tracks her down. And so, the Inquisitor ends up killing some of Ahsoka's friends on that agricultural planet. But it ends in a showdown. Of course, Ahsoka wins. And that's kind of the end of, the novel ends essentially with that showdown, or at least that's kind of the big, confrontation at the end of the book. That wasn't as satisfying to me because it just kind of ends. And, in the middle of the fight, Ahsoka obviously has been trained very well. And the whole point of these Inquisitors is that, maybe they're strong in the Force, but not very strong. And they have these fancy spinning lightsabers because they're not talented enough to use just regular lightsabers. And so she's able to beat him pretty easily. And so like as a battle or as like a duel, it's not really suspenseful. Like, okay, she's going to come out of this pretty easily. But what's interesting is the whole book, she's been carrying around, it's been described that she's just carrying around like random pieces of metal in her pocket or, in a little sack. And she's not really sure why she keeps carrying them around. She's not sure what she's going to do with them. If you're kind of savvy enough, you recognize immediately like, oh, these are going to be pieces of her lightsabers that she rebuilt, that she builds new lightsabers, and this is how she builds those lightsabers. And so sure enough, in the book, you learn a little bit more about kyber crystals and how Jedi or Padawans like find the kyber crystals they're going to use to build their lightsabers. But to make a long story short, she basically takes this Inquisitor's kyber crystals from his lightsaber and uses them herself. And this has been covered already, so I don't think I'm spoiling anything, but there's kind of a new explanation for why the Sith or the dark side Jedi have, or the dark side Force users have red lightsabers, and it's because the kyber crystals like call out to the Jedi. Like basically they pick the Jedi who are going to be using them. And the color, I don't think matters. But then when a dark side person is using them, the dark side Force user is like bending the kyber crystals to his or her will, because really these crystals were meant for someone else. And so they're bending the crystals to their will. And so the crystals like start crying or something. I can't remember if they start crying or like bleeding essentially. And that's why they're red. Why the lightsabers are red. And so after she steals them she takes them from the dead Inquisitor and uses them herself, by this point the kyber crystals are kind of like spent, and so they're just white now. They've been healed from being red, but they'll never be blue or green or purple or whatever else again. So meanwhile, while all that's happening, Bail Organa is around, and he's kind of he's starting to organize part of the seeds of the rebellion. He has his own staff that's involved in getting this stuff set up, and he's on the lookout for again stories of planets that need medical supplies or food or something. And so he's heard of someone doing these good works and delivering this stuff around, and so he kind of tracks her down and is very surprised that it's Ahsoka. R2-D2 makes an appearance in this book, so fans of R2-D2 will be very happy about that. And there's a fun scene where Ahsoka sees R2 again for the first time, and nice reunion there. But anyway, so Bail Organa and Ahsoka eventually kind of meet up, and he says, I want you to help me out. And this whole book, while she's hiding out, and then eventually Ahsoka kind of realizes she can't keep hiding, and she has to do something. She has to join this fight. She has to fight against the rebellion, she has to fight against the Empire, but she's not really sure how to do that, without jeopardizing them even more by revealing that she's a Jedi. And so then at the end, she kind of says, I want to be, Bail Organa, you're doing well, but what you don't have, you're also a senator. You have all these other things going on. You don't have someone to kind of facilitate all of this stuff and move information back and forth between all these groups, because, Bail Organa can't do it because he needs to have some plausible deniability as a senator for these things. And so she kind of says, I'll take that on. I'll be, the person coordinating these things. And so, my code name will be Fulcrum. And so then that's kind of the epilogue for this book of her taking that responsibility, taking that mantle of Fulcrum. Overall, like I said, I really liked it. And I'm someone who, at least in the Clone Wars, thought Ahsoka was okay as a character. Like I didn't have a very strong dislike of her the way some people apparently did. But I did think it was weird that so Anakin has his Padawan for several years, and then it's never mentioned in episode 3 at all. Like that's kind of the thing that kept throwing me off about having her in the Clone Wars. But I liked her well enough in Rebels. And so she's probably closer to Rebels Ahsoka here than she is Clone Wars Ahsoka. I also appreciated that, there were a lot of female characters in this book. And so, there was a New York Times article last week, I think, about how, women who were fans of Star Wars were, either celebrating the fact that there are more female characters in Star Wars, or, talking about how they have to kind of create their own niche for this stuff, and that, there's still a lot of work to do. And some of them were making the point that, even in Rogue One, sort of like what we talked about last week, in Rogue One, Jyn Erso is the main character. Great. But pretty much everyone else in that movie is a guy, right? You have Mon Mothma, I guess, but I can't imagine she's going to have a huge role. But even, the one female character in one of the trailers who has a line, she's a black woman, and she has on this kind of like gold or, really shiny cape and cowl or something. And, these women interviewed for the New York Times article were like super excited about her. But like, I'm pretty sure, at least if that scene is anything like a similar scene in The Force Awakens, like that's going to be that actress's only line in the movie. She might have one more line, but there's still, so we're getting more of these women in Star Wars, but they're not a lot. And you don't have a lot of, this point was also made in the New York Times article. You don't have a lot of portrayal of like female friendships, right? It's right. Who are Leia's friends in the movies, at least, right? It's Luke and Han and Chewie. And who are going to be Jyn Erso's friends in this movie? Well, it's going to be Saw Gerrera, and then eventually like Diego Luna and a droid. And so having those kind of female friendships and relationships portrayed in this movie, or excuse me, in this book, in the Ahsoka novel, it was kind of nice to see, like, all right, they're adding these things in, and they are putting these in the books at least. So that was kind of nice to see as well. But overall, the book's pretty well written. It is a young adult novel, so which isn't to say that those books can't be well written, but in terms of like prose style, I guess there is a slight difference, and there is some violence in it, and there's an interrogation scene, but it's nothing like that Life Debt book where they're describing like someone's eye being gouged out and what the scar looks like, and there's nothing like that in this book, because it's not that kind of novel. But I think it's also, overall it's a very well written book. I didn't feel like the prose was dumbed down or anything like that. So, I think I said this last week too, but overall I would probably put it below Bloodline and Lost Stars, but it's I would probably put it on the same level as kind of the next tier down from that so far, which is probably Twilight Company and maybe A New Dawn. I might have liked this book a little better than New Dawn in some places, just because I've said this before, but A New Dawn has all that weird like kind of male gaze stuff about Kanan thinking Hera is super hot or she has nice eyes or stuff. And then what's it called? The Perfect Weapon. I'd say I'd put this with The Perfect Weapon too, probably. So overall, I definitely recommend reading it.
Cool. So I mean, you don't. I find it's kind of interesting how they decide which stories are kind of told in that. And I will say I have kind of a thing where a blind spot when it comes to stuff that's considered like young adult. It's like, I don't know what it is. And I'm not trying to say that because I'm a slow reader. It's not like I'm like this guy who knows literature up and down, but for some reason, just a lot of young adult, like I tried to read The Hunger Games. I tried to read Harry Potter. It's just something about that kind of style just kind of irks me. And I can't, I have a lot of problem getting into the story, but that's really my own burden. But even that being said, it's kind of interesting that they would take something, you know, like an important character and kind of, in my view, relegate it to something that would be young adult. Do you think it might be because that Ahsoka does tend to skew to younger fans? I mean, I don't really know I know that my nieces will bring books from the library that are Star Wars books, and most of the time they are kind of Ahsoka, like, is the protagonist of these stories.
I mean, one thing that worries me a little bit is that I'm worried that, I mean, I wouldn't say relegating, but that they're making, you know, the novels that have, you know, a female protagonist, those are the ones that are becoming the young adult novels, right? So there's Ahsoka, Lost Stars, which, you know, is kind of a Romeo and Juliet love story kind of thing, where, you know, with a strong female protagonist. There's going to be a Jyn Erso novel coming out next year that's going to be a young adult novel. I don't think Dark Disciple was considered a young adult novel, but
no, I don't think it was.
But
Bloodlines definitely wasn't.
Bloodline, right? So Bloodline would be one exception. I guess Dark Disciple might be another exception. But, you know, what I don't want to see, I also don't, you know, they're not making like you know, young adult they're not making, I don't think any of the young adult novels that have come out, you know, they're not making like a Kanan young adult novel. You know, it's that the young adult novels seem to be maybe oriented more towards girls so far. And as soon as I say that, I should acknowledge, like, I don't know a lot about the young adults book market these days.
Yeah, I don't either.
And that may be widespread beyond Star Wars. It may not be. I may be way off on this.
Well, I mean, I think the only thing I've heard...
But I would say that...
Sorry.
Yeah, I don't know that I would say relegated, but I think this is all... the reason why this would be a young adult novel and not like an adult novel... yeah, I mean, I think it may have to do with the character, right? And the character was introduced as a young girl, and you know, the fans of Ahsoka, while there are fans of Ahsoka who are, you know, our age, I think the way she was introduced and her age within the universe, they probably figured that she's a character that's going to resonate more with teenager, you know, readers in like middle and high school, and so that could be why they decided to do it as a young adult novel. That would be my guess, rather than like, well, we're just make all of our novels about women, you know, young adult novels. But I think it probably has more to do with the character and her development as a character and kind of the age range she is within the universe. And that has more to do with the decision to make this a young adult novel. So sorry, since I've interrupted you, go ahead.
No, and the only other thing I relegated. I mean, obviously my bias is showing about young adult stuff. It's just kind of, and there's been a lot of talk about that. People poo-poo young adult, and I kind of do, and that we're kind of missing out on a lot of stuff. And I will totally concede that point. It's just that it's like I like a certain style of and honestly I can't even sit down and go, well, this is why I just wonder. It's like why there's even that delineation unless they're worried about. Because it's like I read all the novelizations and the Han Solo books and most of the Lando books when I was before I was even 10 or 11 years old, and I'm not I could handle it is my point, right? And maybe it's now that they are kind of more sensitive about violence or young adult is kind of a thing where it's like, yeah, hey, maybe I want to read a Star Wars book about my favorite character, and I'm a grown up, whatever, and I don't want to have to worry about, in the 15th chapter that somebody's eye is going to get plucked out of their head. So I can kind of understand that. But that being said, I think, well, this novel, and again, I didn't read it, but I noticed in the fan communities and on it was a big deal that this came out. It was a positive, like they love that character. I'm kind of in the boat where I was like, her early appearances on the Clone Wars is part of the reason that I kind of jumped ship on the Clone Wars. And just because the characterization, I had a problem with the fact that just in the way I create the timeline in my head, it's like, how could he have a, Padawan when, blah, 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 but whatever. Right. She's actually, she's become a beloved character, even more, I would say, considering that she's had depictions, in media and Ashley Eckstein has, been a real herald for her character, which, she's been more important to people than say like a Mara Jade or a lot of even the Solo, even Jaina Solo is in the old EU, because there's representations of her she's part of the canon now. Right. So you have to accept that. But I just find it's interesting that they would go for like, since they are kind of rewriting a lot of the old stories as far as like what the deal with lightsabers, and it's stuff that used to be relegated to say, role-playing game type stuff.
Right.
It's like I find it.
I don't know which came first. Whether E.K. Johnston was like, oh, I want to, as part of this novel, I want to tell the story of how she got these white lightsabers, and wouldn't it be cool if she took them from a Inquisitor that she killed? Except then, how do we go from red to white? Well, let me make this up. I don't know if that was the chain of the chronological development of how they came up with that backstory, or if that was something that was already being developed, or it was already kind of around, or if she said, hey, I want to change, wouldn't it be great if this was the way lightsabers became red, and then let me write the story to that. And then Lucasfilm was like, yeah, okay, fine, whatever. I don't know. I mean, because E.K. Johnston has talked a little bit about her process and interviews she's done, and on Twitter and things. She's talked about where some of the ideas came from and what part of the process and things. But I don't think she's talked about that specifically, where that idea came from. But yeah, I mean, that is kind of like a.
Maybe I think it's a bigger deal than it really is. You know what I mean?
And within the book, I mean, that wasn't the description of like where kyber crystals come from and why they are red or not red. It in the book, to me, it did kind of read like an encyclopedia entry, and I was like, I could do without it. Or like, I just didn't really care about. I don't really care why it's red. It's red because they're bad. And that, when Lucas was making the movies, that was the thought process that went into it. Like, I don't need an in-universe explanation for why they're red. But others may. want that, and they may not have been happy with there's synthetic kyber crystals explanation that was the previous canon explanation. And so if that's the case, then great. Now there is a new explanation that hopefully is more satisfying.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how that ties into the at least the rumors that we've heard that the planet Jeddah is considered like a big, thing of maybe, I don't know. It's like that. What was the planet that that Ezra got his?
He got his on Lothal.
So they're not tied to one
planet. So they've already said, they've had to say like, and there are also some kyber crystals. Kyber crystals only grow on this one planet, and also on Lothal, apparently. Like they've already had to kind of do that.
Yeah, it's this kind of
so
thing.
I don't know if we'll be adding Jeddah to that list.
If they're going to be
planets with harvestable kyber crystals.
Yeah. I think they kind of want to flirt with that idea of making, having a lightsaber to be very rare. That might explain why Kylo Ren has that jacked up saber, which again is kind of like, oh, then why did they show it? Why did they tease that on Rebels that he picked up a busted saber or something? But
right.
I guess it doesn't really matter. It's like anything can be sat down. They can sit you down and explain it to you. I just feel like it's funny how they sometimes kind of they pick around these ideas without jumping in and just committing to them. And so that's why you get these things like, oh, well, kyber crystals are available only on Lothal and Jeddah, or Kylo Ren, he's the Knight of Ren, and this is an expression of his hatred of the Force or something. And then I was like, oh, but the Siths had these weird lightsabers with cross guards too. But I mean, I think that's what happens when you create, a universe out of whole cloth or whatever. Do we want to? Are we done? We want to jump into some comics?
Well, the only question I had for you, Robert. I mean, you said you're kind of a slow reader, and I think you read Bloodline.
Yes. Yeah.
So, what novels have you read? You've read Bloodline. And you read the first Aftermath, I think, right?
Yeah, and I read. It's sad to say that, and then I gave up on the novelization because I didn't enjoy it.
Right.
Because I got an audio, and the guy that did Poe Dameron, he did Poe Dameron like he was stoned out of his mind. It was like the way he did it.
And then you've read the short story, The Perfect Weapon.
Yeah, I'm probably way behind on Star Wars books. I am fully committed to reading Catalyst, though.
Well, because I was going to say, Catalyst comes out in less than a week. But then after Catalyst, we're getting a new Star Wars novel, either young adult or regular adult. I don't know how else to say non-young adult. But, a Star Wars novel, we're getting one essentially every month up at least through April or May, I think.
Really?
So there's Catalyst, and then we have the novelization, which
by James Luceno did.
Alexander Freed's doing the novelization of Rogue One. But then, so what's coming out I feel like there is something coming out in December that I'm missing. If it's not the novelization.
It's Zahn is coming out. I mean,
Zahn's coming out in April. Rogue One, the novelization's coming out in January. The Aftermath, the third book of the Aftermath trilogy is coming out in February. So I guess maybe we're not getting one in December. But we're getting one this month, and then January, February, April, we might be getting, and then I don't know when that the Jyn Erso novel is coming out either. So we have all that coming out, and then they've also said, because I guess next year is going to be, is it next year that's the 40th anniversary?
Yeah.
Or is it? Yeah. So they're already planning a big slate of books and things for that. I mean, do you feel like we're getting too much Star Wars content, or at least too many books out of this? I mean, do you feel like you're having a hard time keeping up, or are you fine to let the books kind of pass you by and not really worry about what's in them?
Yeah, I'll be honest, I'm kind of all right letting a few of them pass me by. It's I was very much a fan of the original EU back in the early 90s. those the Timothy Zahn books. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
I think I didn't read Heir to the Empire till like almost a year and a half after it came out or something. Like I didn't know it existed because there wasn't this thing called the internet constantly.
Right.
It's like I lived in a town that literally had one Walden Books, and that was,
Yeah.
whatever they had out was whatever they had. You didn't know what was out. So anyway,
Mm-hmm.
I bought it and got really into it because at the time I really wasn't into Star Wars. I just graduated from high school. I was moving to Seattle. And then I got into it really heavy, but then I had that same problem that a lot of people had. It's just there was too much. It felt, at least in the the 90s and the aughts, that there was that thing. Like every time it's like, oh, I just finished this book, and now it's like, oh, there's another book and it's a trilogy.
Right.
And it's like, and then they stopped putting them out, and and financial the financial aspect was an actual concern for me, because it's like every single one of these things was $20.
Right.
So
this
I'd
was
have
before ebooks.
Yeah.
You couldn't just buy it for $5. You had to spend.
Yeah.
I mean, and especially if, some of these, if you were buying them in hardback, then you're dropping
right.
$20 or more.
I had to make a decision when the Last Command came out, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
and I was I was a smoker back then, and I was like, well, cigarettes or, this book. And it's like, I was making the quote grown up choice, and like, well, I'll hold off. Maybe I'll ask for that for Christmas kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I did buy that one in hardcover. But yeah, it was like, then all of a sudden the Truce of Bakura came out. Then
Right.
the Kevin J. Anderson trilogy. Then the Black Fleet Crisis, and then there was there was the Han Solo Carillion trilogy,
Right.
and and I already, so it was like one of those things, like those were the times I really got into it, and I really enjoyed the anthology books, the Tales of Jabba's Palace, the Tales of the Cantina. Not so much there was like a Tales from the Empire that I felt was kind of weak.
Yeah.
But I guess my point is that, I kind of have to be I either have to kind of force myself to read these now, or to just really be, really be diligent about what I want to read, because I'm again, like I said earlier, it's like I feel real spoiled because we're getting new comics all the time.
Right.
And they're taking a greater, I would say that the comic when Dark Horse owned the comics, they still had a lot of the same problems where they would just kind of be contradicting the books, and the Dark Empire had Heir to the Empire and Dark Empire were always kind of in contradiction, even though they mention each other.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I just can't imagine I'm going to have to pick and choose, because I can't imagine myself I get easily distracted if I'm not completely engrossed in these stories. And to be frank, that's kind of the reason why I avoid the young adult, because if I just feel like it's kind of, if I'm having to read something that's just kind of like, I can see how they constructed it, and it kind of bugs me. And I think young adult can be a little bit more like that. You can see like, oh, they're trying to be, I don't want to say dumb it down, but they're trying to simplify the story too much. And I like a little, like, that's why I really enjoyed Bloodlines. Cause like, even though I have some minor quibbles with some of the characterization in that, overall, I was like, this is the book I've been waiting for, because I mean, that's really the end. I want the stakes to be high. I want it to be people that that I'm going to really want to think. I want to know what's going on with Luke. I wanted to know what's going on with Han. I want to know what's Lando. And I want to know, Jyn is now going to be part of this. So therefore I want to know what's going on with her, and stuff like Lost Stars, and as much as, and even Aftermath, it's like, I find it really hard when I realize I'm going to have to sit down and read this.
Right.
To be like, well, I'm not really into these people. I don't know who they are. I bought Tarkin, and I'll be honest, it's like, it's still on the shelf. I haven't even opened it. It's kind of like,
yeah, I'm actually rereading Tarkin to sort of get into Catalysts. And yeah, I mean, Tarkin's okay. I like the bits where we get sort of more backstory on Tarkin and his life growing up on Eriadu, and sort of how he became the way he is. Like, that part's interesting, but the actual sort of present day plot of him uncovering this conspiracy or, trying to make sure that, him being under attack and these people that he wronged in the past, trying to get the revenge. That part is not very exciting to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and to be, being honest, to get right down to the brass tacks, it's like, yeah, I'm in this weird place with reading where I get very distracted very easily because it's like, you read on the internet all day and articles and things like that. And it's like, and I have to sit down and read a book and it's going to take 30 pages before I even get a sense of who these people are. I mean, that's really on me, to be honest.
It is a, sorry, I didn't know if you were going to.
No, I didn't.
It is a time investment, right? It's sort of like, well, am I going to spend 3 hours at this movie? Except, it's gonna take hours and hours and hours, and can I devote a week or 2 weeks to reading this book? Which might include some characters I care about, and then also some side characters who are basically just there and are going to die in the course of the book, and I don't really have to care about them that much anyway. You do have to kind of be realistic about, all right, how much of this is actually crucial to like enjoying the movies that are come out with, they are kind of prioritizing, okay, you have the movies. It's not prioritizing in terms of different levels of canon, but like, right. The movies are the thing that obviously drive everything. And then after that, you can kind of pick whether you care about the books or the comics. And so, yeah, if you really just mostly get excited about the movies, then yeah, you don't necessarily need to keep up with every novel. Like the novels, like I said, I'm reading Tarkin now to read Catalyst later, just to see if they match up in some way. But I have no expectation that like Tarkin is going to at all inform the way that I watch Rogue One, and if that's the case, and especially with this Ahsoka novel, I have a pretty good feeling that this is the last we're going to hear of Ahsoka for a while, at least. Just because we have kind of the beginning, middle, and end of her story, really. Reading this novel, like I said, it was a nice kind of origin story for her character on Rebels, but reading this novel didn't like change the way that I thought or watched season 2 of Rebels, or it didn't really inform the way I felt about her character on Rebels. It was just like, oh, that's kind of interesting, and then that's as far as it goes for me anyway. So yeah, it can be a big time investment for the ultimate payoff of like, no, I guess that's kind of interesting that that's what they're doing with the character. So no, I mean, I don't think you should feel bad at all about feeling free to skip some of the novels or not trying to keep up with everything.
Yeah, I mean, we're in this embarrassment of riches that even like I even find myself, the night before getting ready for a show, having to go, oh, I'm behind on a comic or something. Like, or I haven't, like last night, I didn't know how the show was going to get if we were, which we probably weren't going to get time to go into catching up on Rebels, but I had to go the episode 6 from season 3, Imperial Super Commandos. I didn't even know it was out. And I'm like, I'm rushing to go to Disney XD and watch that. So, which I did.
Yeah.
But it's like, yeah, it's just like, there's so much stuff. It's like,
yeah,
with the comics and stuff, it's like you would have to, even doing a show like this, it's like I feel like I'm sometimes behind, and that's why I think that's why the books kind of take the back seat.
Yeah, well, and that's, and I don't think they want. I mean, certainly they're putting all this stuff out there and they're marketing it, and there's, I guess, maybe peer pressure on Twitter of, Star Wars Twitter being like, oh, the new Ahsoka novel's out, great. Or apparently people have already read Catalyst because they're like, great, here's my copy of Catalyst. I can't wait till it comes out next week. And you're like, well, yeah, I guess you've already read it then.
They never responded to my email. Sorry.
Oh yeah, no, that's fine.
Now we have a website. I should try that again.
Yeah, but I guess it's understandable if some people would feel that like they have to keep up with all this stuff, and that but you never want it to seem like homework or like, oh, I guess I have to catch up on Rebels, and that's just essentially a function of us talking about it,
right?
But as a fan, like, you never really want to get to that point where like, oh, I have to read this book, and I've thought about that too with in the future. At least the novels that are coming out over the next several months will look like they'll be pretty good and look like they might be something I like to read. But, even the novelization, like, I never really felt compelled to read the Force Awakens novelization. And I'm probably not going to read the Rogue One novelization either. And if there's a novel that comes out later on that doesn't look like it's something I care about, this Jyn Erso book, for example, like, I guess we'll just wait and see, and I'll see if I feel like reading it, and if so, fine. And if I don't feel like reading it, then I'm not gonna like wonder like, oh, what am I missing by not reading this book? It's just, it's there if you want it, and if not, there are plenty of other things to do to enjoy Star Wars.
Oh yeah. Do we got time to? Oh yeah, we got time to do some comics, which I did read.
Mm-hmm.
Out there.
So we've had the Star Wars title, the Poe Dameron title, the Han Solo title all in the last couple of weeks. I guess, do you want to start with Star Wars 24?
Yeah, let me
This is the last flight of the Harbinger. So if you recall, Luke, Leia, Han, Chewie, Sana basically hijacked an Imperial Star Destroyer, but the hyperdrive got blown out. So they're kind of stuck where they are. And so them and some the other rebels with them are trying to get this Star Destroyer to break through a blockade over some other planet so they can deliver food to the starving population. But this Scar Squadron, this ragtag group of stormtroopers who, I guess they're not ragtag, but there's the one who's really into knives, and there's the one who's really into bombs, and there's the one who's super muscly, and there's the I can't remember his actual name, but he used to be his code name used to be the Game Master, and he has a lightsaber. So they've made it onto the Harbinger, and they're kind of systematically going through and trying to kill all the rebels. So they're kind of threatening the mission, and that's basically what happens in this issue. Is just this Scar Squadron being on the Star Destroyer and causing trouble for the rebels in completing their mission. Sana at one point almost gets blasted out into space, but she's able to hang on to the bulkhead or something, and she survives. I mean, Sana hasn't had a lot to do in this story. She's basically, all she's done so far is just be like, oh, wow, Han and Leia are really in love. They just don't know it. That's basically all she's been there to do and say. But you get a sense at the end of this issue that maybe she's going to be the one to come to everyone's rescue, which will be interesting if that's the case. And then at the very end, Luke and the Game Master are in some kind of lightsaber duel. And then more Star Destroyers show up. Darth Vader shows up. So this is his first appearance in the Star Wars title post... I guess post Vader down. And so this is
So I was gonna say post him shooting his girlfriend out the airlock.
Well, that too, but yeah. So we've completed the circle of the Darth Vader comic title, and so now he's back in the Star Wars title, and he's leading the charge to try to take this Star Destroyer. So he is fully informed. He knows who blew up the Death Star. He knows. He is fully in command. He's the Emperor's number 2 once again. He's restored his rightful place in the hierarchy, and so he's lean and mean, and he's back to really give these rebels what for. And so that's kind of where we end up in Star Wars 24. I guess the only thing is the writing in this one's okay. In this story is okay to me, but just the art. I'm just not connecting with the artwork in this arc.
No, and I'd say that
it's just a little off for me.
That's its my biggest problem with it. It's like people don't look good. I mean, it's like they don't do the doing this kind of like, I don't even know what you call the art style.
I mean, it's a little more cartoony than previous issue, right? So previous arcs of the Star Wars, it was, okay, this looks a little more like Carrie Fisher or whomever, or if not an exact likeness, it's done in a particular style that's maybe a little more realistic looking. And this is, the proportions of the body and the facial expressions and everything, they're a little more cartoony than previously.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just the depictions of the face. Like they don't do poor Sana. I don't remember what's her real last name now. I keep
can't
calling
remember
her
if they've
Sana
said
Solo.
what it is.
It's like, there's a very which John mentioned before, the airlock sequence, which in some ways is very evocative of, say, Sigourney Weaver in the second Alien movies. The depiction of her face, she almost looks like a skeleton. It's like they try to make it look like she's under duress, and it just makes her look like she's constipated or something. It's
Sana Staros, that's her name.
Yeah, Sana Staros. And like, just, I don't know, just a lot of it feels like I'm looking at people posing action figures and then drawing them. Mm-hmm. There's not a lot of, it doesn't feel very organic. And obviously they've made a stylistic choice, but I just, like I said, I'm just not a fan of it. But I do like the straight action of the story. Yeah, I think it's still an interesting idea. It's like the nuts and the bolts of a rebellion, and bringing Vader back in, even though now we know he knows who he's dealing with. It's very much, again my high water mark. I don't know why I keep doing this, because every time I go back and read them, I kind of roll my eyes and go, "This is what I used to like." But the high water mark of the original Marvel run, of the idea where it was just this kind of thing where they were constantly on the run from Darth Vader. And then they would occasionally get into little, jackpots along the way. And I always kind of like that, where it's always that feeling that Vader is always kind of 2 steps behind them. That's kind of, and I like that he shows up and he's got, this Scar Squadron, who I, for some reason, although I kind of hate the idea of him having a lightsaber, I do like that there's this, excuse me, that there's this group of sorry. My throat just dried right out. Just this idea that there's these stormtroopers for every occasion, like the Swiss Army knife of stormtroopers, which is always the kind of thing that they had depicted in the past. Which keeps coming up again. Like, I think before you were kind of like, oh, are they just going to add new troopers every time? It's kind of a marketing thing. Yeah, I think they're going to kind of do that. But...
Yeah, I mean, I'm less a fan of this Scar Squadron. I mean, if they show up, if they recur and they maybe develop these characters a little more, that might be one thing. But as of now, we only really know kind of the backstory of the leader of this group, and so like it just seems kind of a generic, like, okay, there's like the bombs guy and the knives guy and whatever else. I don't find the rest of them to be that distinctive, but like I said, if they survive this storyline and they get brought back in the future, like maybe you can build something. But I mean that they bringing Vader back in at the end, I mean, when I saw that page and those panels with he's like, oh, my boss is coming, or like, you'll have to tell my boss or something. And then you see Vader. I got a very kind of like Ride of the Valkyries kind of like sense of, the Vader and all these TIE fighters and these Star Destroyers showing up. It's, it was kind of a, like in your head. So Ride of the Valkyries, it's that like, da, 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 da,
right.
da,
da,
da, da, da,
use it in Apocalypse
thing.
Now.
Right. I got that kind of sense of it, which is, I don't know if that was intentional or if there was something they did in the artwork or the timing of the writing to evoke that, but that's kind of what I got. So that added a little bit to that. And so, yeah, I'm kind of curious now to see, okay, so how is Vader going to approach this now? And you can imagine, right, he's going to be very different in the way he handles these rebels than he was in the very first, issue or two of the Star Wars title. And so that'll be interesting to see as well. And who knows who he'll be interacting with now.
Exactly, because he always kind of needs somebody. He can't just go around strangling his subordinates all the time. It has to.
Right.
I think that's kind of with that character, in the way he was kind of posited or depicted, I guess is a better word. But in the olden days, it's like they would kind of do these funny things in the comics where they would make, which maybe some analog to the Cold War or something, where it was like they'd have an issue where Darth Vader would have to go to a planet where he couldn't kill people because it wasn't an imperial controlled world, and like Princess Leia would have to be there too, and they'd be negotiating for some thing, and the guy hadn't decided whether he's going to help the Imperials or help the rebels, and then they would have to sit there and just kind of like.
I feel like it's a very Star Trek idea too.
Yeah,
right?
I know.
It's very clearly an episode of Star Trek where like the Federation and the Klingons are on some like neutral planet to negotiate a deal, and there's like someone there, and he's not sure who they're going to side with, or if they're going to side with anyone, and then something happens, and they, either stay neutral or they side with the Federation or something.
And it's definitely not something they can do now, because now that we know that Vader is related to all these people, it's kind of like, how long are they gonna get? How long is why the fact that he never said, you kind of look like my ex-wife, when she was on the Tantive 4, but I mean, you could make an excuse of like, well, he's so enraptured by the dark side that he started to forget faces.
He's looking at her through the mask and all the electronical gizmos that it distorts the view.
Yeah, I get the feeling, though, that the rebels aren't going to be able to keep this Star Destroyer for very long. It's losing pieces. And then there's this whole lightsaber battle. Am I supposed to believe that there's a carbon freezing chamber on the...
Yeah, I couldn't tell that either.
It's kind of like that's the same...
Each Star Destroyer has its own.
Yeah, it's like, how much carbon do you need to freeze?
Yeah.
I never understood that. Do they actually use the carbon? Do they freeze carbon, or do they use carbon as a freezing element? I don't know. That's never really explained. I think that's probably just me needing to chill out and not worry about it. Was that kind of everything we had to say about this?
Yeah, one? I think, I said, this issue is basically just continue. The Scar Squadron shows up. They start causing trouble for the rebels. There's this lightsaber duel happening, and then Vader shows up. Yeah, it's a very action based issue. It's not not essential if you're jumping in on this. Much like, sadly, I'm to say that our next ones we're going to talk about, which is Poe Dameron. Yeah, so Poe Dameron number 7 came out either last week or 2 weeks ago, and then just yesterday, Poe Dameron number 8 came out. And so Poe Dameron number 7 is sort of a standalone issue in between the arc of the first 6 issues, and then a new story arc starts in issue 8. And so Poe Dameron 7 is this kind of standalone thing. It's parts of it are fun, but the way it ends up, it's like, that's all this is. But anyway, Poe Dameron 7, Poe is on a planet to meet an old friend of his who has information about the First Order, she says anyway. And then it turns out she is a journalist who is really just trying to use the fact that she knows Poe Dameron to try to find out the location of the Resistance base, and then she's going to publish that, and that will get her a better job or a steady paycheck or something. So they're on this planet. So she stages, we find out towards the end, she basically stages this chase between herself and Poe and the First Order. They're all kind of after them both because he's Poe Dameron. And then by the time, so they eventually escape. Poe takes her to the Resistance base on Dakar. And when she gets there, she realizes that, well, the First Order is bad after all. That, really she just kind of set this thing up to get some information, but the First Order was really threatening to kill her and Poe, and that maybe they're bad. And so then at the very end, she says, side, and she joins up with the resistance, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, the ending of this issue for me was like, oh, that's all this is. But I think there were some cool. There's a neat kind of the chase sequence. There's these ships on this planet. There's a lot of water around, and so they're on these kind of like wind surfing ships, sort of thing.
Yeah, not terribly different than what Dooku, his personal ship at the end of Attack of the Clones,
right?
Which was called Solar Sailor or something.
Yeah. But these are so these have like wings made out of sails, and they travel along the water. So I kind of like the idea and the design of those ships, and there's some cool artwork with lightning happening and an interesting color scheme, because the Poe's friend is this kind of greenish bluish, kind of aqua or teal, or in some cases she's shaded a little purpley depending on the lighting. But so you've got that, and then there's this lightning storm with these kind of dark purple and blue clouds going on, and there's some neat art in here.
She kind of looks like a Na'vi from
a little bit
Cameron's Avatar.
Yeah, she does. I think this one had a different artist than the other issues. Phil Noto normally does the interior art for these, I believe, and this is Angel Unzueta, and so I think Unzueta does and Frank Darmada does the color work. So, and I think both of them did a good job here. But yeah, it is sort of it's a one-off. It's maybe this will inform future storylines, but as it stands, this is sort of off on its own.
Well, I like the depiction. I like the art. The depiction of Oscar Isaac is a lot better than stuff. There's obviously the little nod to the prequels with the droid that serves drinks. Right. I mean, I would say that the real weak link on this issue would be, in my opinion, the dialogue. I mean, we're joking. If you listen all the way to the end of the show, I made a joke about this comic because I had already finished it. That he uses the term "put it on my tab" like on 3 or 4 times in this comic, and it's not funny at all. It just becomes like this, like put it on my tab. Oh, maybe I shouldn't have put this on my tab. It was just kind of like I don't know. Maybe I
think we talked about this. I think when the Poe Dameron comic first started. But, you don't have a lot to go on with that character and knowing how to write that character. You really have one movie, and even then you have not a whole lot of screen time for Poe Dameron, really. To try to figure out who this character is and how they would react and how he talks, there's not as much to go on as there is with like Han and Leia and Luke and Vader. So, yeah, they either like way overdo the stuff that we know he says, like, oh, I can fly anything. Like, that's made several appearances in this comic already. Or, he calls droids buddy and pal and that kind of stuff. Like, the way he talks to BB-8. Or, they come up with, like, new dialogue for him, like this put it on my tab thing. And it's like, it doesn't sound right somehow. Yeah. Especially when they overdo it, like I said.
I mean, like I said, it was an interesting story, although I found the ending to be a little strange.
It's a little abrupt.
Yeah, and honestly, it feels to me it's like, so okay. I mean, I like this idea that the Resistance is a rumor, the First Order is a rumor. It's which is something that they basically. I mentioned this last time. I think is that I was very confused about what kind of standing, say, General Leia now and the First Order kind of had in the galaxy. And, Bloodline really kind of fleshed it out a little bit more about, kind of the idea that...
Right. The origins of those things.
Yeah, the origins of the First Order is kind of being kind of something that organized in secret. And and then at the end of that book, is the impetus behind Leia creating the Resistance.
Mm-hmm.
Which, like I said, the movie did a poor job, but it's like this idea that, this character, oh gosh, what's her name? I forget the character's name, but she just
friend. Yeah, I don't.
Yeah. She just like up and quits. And like, I mean, but if she was a journalist, wouldn't have been more useful her to have gone back and written an expose about this and like pointed out like, yeah, I actually went to do a story and the First Order came after me.
You would think so.
This isn't a joke. Instead, she's like, no, I quit. No, I'll just sit here.
I'm in the Resistance now.
Yeah, I have to pick a side, which is a weird thing for a journalist to say anyway.
Yeah.
It's like
Linda Javos is the name of this character.
So, I mean, I don't know. That's the other thing. I've always had kind of a slight discomfort with and I know that it's like if you want to create a full living kind of fictional universe, the idea that like there would be journalists would be part of it. It's just like they did this they hinted about this during the novelization for Revenge of the Sith, which was a very experimental book, which it was like the author, I forget who wrote that one. I think it's somebody
Matthew
Stover.
Yeah.
It was this idea that like, oh, what if, it was the fact that Obi-Wan and Anakin were extremely famous and that they were constantly being written about in the media, their exploits and stuff like that, which is kind of interesting when, 10 years later, they actually have gone back on, obviously it's a different company and now they're like, oh, the Jedi were a myth. They're, but if there had been media out there, it's like people would have known about it.
Yeah.
So now
and that was in that, was it Luke Skywalker in the Shadows of Mindor? Or whatever that book. I mean, that was a key thing too, that there were these like hollow movies being made that were, had fictional adventures of a real person in the universe. I don't know. Like I said, I mean, in some ways, this Poe Dameron 7 almost feels like, they were making an annual instead of making, Poe Dameron annual #1. That's kind of what this was. And so given what they did with the annuals for Star Wars and for Darth Vader, where, they introduced these characters that then became integrated into either other one-off issues or, full story arcs, I don't know if we'll be seeing Sura Linda Javos in the Poe Dameron comic in the future. So maybe they're just kind of introducing her here, and then they wanted she's going to be the next Dr. Aphra or something like that. But if this is all we see of her, then it's kind of a weird. Like she's simultaneously given too much space, and she's not given enough space to actually like develop this character and have her actions make a lot of sense, or to have the reader understand her actions. But then at the same time, like she's such a big presence in this book, in this issue, that it's like, well, why don't we still understand like why she would just quit? And like you said, instead of writing an expose of this First Order, she just like, oh, the Resistance now. Like I don't know.
Yeah, making her a journalist who abandons her career at like a drop of a hat makes you question why they even bothered to make her a journalist. She could have been a mechanic.
She could have been anything. Yeah. But I do, and you alluded to this too. Like, I do think it's interesting that, like you said, that in this issue, the First Order and the Resistance are both kind of rumors, and which, given how close to The Force Awakens this comic is set, I guess. I mean, I don't know how soon before the events of The Force Awakens this takes place, but relatively soon, which indicates that, or suggests anyway, that in The Force Awakens, most of the universe doesn't really know what the First Order is, which seems weird because they have all these stormtroopers and all, this huge base. But at the same time, like you said last week, you pointed out that scene where Poe gets taken on the Star Destroyer, he's kind of looking around like, wow, what is this? I didn't know they had this much stuff. And so it could very well be, how, given that the government of the New Republic was destroyed, how are they going to explain how that was explained within the universe? Like, is the First Order going to take credit for it, and that's going to be when everyone learns that the First Order is a thing that exists? Or, you know, how many people in the galaxy actually have heard of the First Order and the Resistance and even know that this thing is going on? Like, that's kind of an interesting question now that for them to answer.
Yeah, it's kind of like, and I always wish they had gone. I know it's something that got dropped from the Force Awakens, was that there was a Corsair who shows up in Bloodline, had a kind of a direct communique. No, I'm sorry, I'm confusing the character. Who was on the planet? The woman that looks out at the, is that Corsair who looks out at the when the planet gets destroyed? Because I think there's actually
I can't remember her name now.
So anyway, she had some relationship, though. I think it was because it was the fact that she kept on like communicating back and forth with somebody in the Republic that was deleted, and they don't even show it in the movie. But I had seen. Oh
yeah, that is that character's name. I was thinking of the pilot, but yeah, it's Corsair.
Yeah, Corsair. The fact that she had this kind of like, she had an inroad into the government, and they would supply her with information. And she was, this woman, Corey or whatever they call her in Bloodline. She wasn't. She at least had the Chancellor's ear,
right?
And I think this would be a great thing for them to flesh out a little bit. This idea, like, well, were they taking her serious? Was this because it kind of sounds, the way they do it is like it's all kind of very sub rosa, and that nobody knew what was going on. But at least in the book, not in the book, in the movie, they were, from what we heard that they were going to have in the movie, that they were going to try to create this thing that, like, yeah, Leia's been kind of marginalized. But she still has a contact to the high command or whatever that she knows. And then it was supposed to kind of amp up the emotion when the planet is actually not selenium system, but whatever I'm getting all my names out. When the actual seat of the Republic is destroyed, it was supposed to heighten the emotion, which
Hosnian
Prime, thank you. And I felt they never sold that enough. Like I said last week, I was like, I went out completely thinking that Coruscant had been destroyed. Coruscant's been destroyed? I guess that's one way of getting out of having to explain where Coruscant is. Maybe they should have. It might have been made it more interesting. But, yeah, I guess this whole kind of like him going on these missions, like I said, it was a one-off or whatever, but I just kind of like, I still feel like I'm still not really getting a good sense of this character. It says somebody goes, oh, he makes that joke. His first thing that he says to Kylo Ren is a joke. So let's have him do jokes. And it's like, well, okay. Yeah, and it's an odd, like I said, they don't have a lot to go on. But, they did that for years with Wedge and minor characters that would pop up in Star Wars, that they would kind of flesh them out, and they were able to do it before, so I don't know why it's so hard to do it well now. But that's it's, like I said, this is Poe Dameron's not my favorite title right now. I'm kind of I've been disappointed, but well, I guess they do kind of go back to the main thrust of Poe Dameron 8 is a little bit more interesting. I think so this is the start of a new story arc, picking up back where we left off with the previous one, where there's kind of a mole within Black Squadron feeding information to Agent Terex, and so Poe Dameron 8 starts out, he's thinking about all of his friends in Black Squadron, and he doesn't really know who to trust anymore. The only person he does seem to place all of his trust in is Adi Muva, the Abednado mechanic. So the first part of the issue is just him like practicing martial arts or kickboxing or whatever, and thinking about who he can trust. And then 3PO shows up, and Leia is sending 3PO on this mission to a planet called Kadak
to see what happened to a droid that it had. And supposedly, I guess 3PO has some like information network of droids that's feeding him like data about what's happening in all these places. And so apparently there was a droid that allegedly had information about Snoke's location, and then the droid like disappeared or stopped transmitting, and so 3PO is being sent to see what happened. And so 3PO is going with Poe, and then this Adi is the one that Poe brings along because he can trust Adi. Meanwhile, Terex is also showing up on Kadak because we learn the other piece of this issue is learning more about Terex's backstory. We knew he used to be a stormtrooper, but we find out he had been at the Battle of Jakku, and then the Star Destroyer crashes on Jakku. He's with some other stormtroopers, one of whom kills their sergeant and then is like, hey, look, the rebels are going to be hunting us down, try to arrest us. We need to ditch all of our stormtrooper gear and just get off this planet. And so Terex kind of goes along with it, to survive. But he in his heart knows that, he's still loyal to the Empire and he doesn't want to give that up. So they cobble together. It's kind of neat. They cobble together. It's like an AT-AT head cockpit, but then they weld
TIE
interceptor wings to it. And like fly that around, which is kind of a fun.
Yeah,
it's a fun visual, I think.
It's so funny that this happens the week after I say, why didn't the First Order use like beat to hell made up ships? Yeah.
So Terex and his fellow stormtrooper, they go to Kadak after this, and so that's where the flashback ends. And then in present day, Terex is returning to Kadak because he's failed to recover the location of Lor San Tekka. He's failed, and so he's lost something within himself, and so he's returning to Kadak to try to find that thing he's lost. And so we're going to learn more about what he did on Kadak, I guess, in the next issue. But then the other piece of this too is that present day Terex, he has this like secret stash of old Imperial armor that he's collected over the years and kind of cobbled together something that looks more like a samurai's armor.
He looks like that. I forget the company, but they do like these kind of. Have you seen those ones where they do they do the stormtroopers and they look like
right. And they have one of Darth Vader too, right? Like if Darth Vader or if a stormtrooper were a samurai, this is kind of what they would look like. So I mean, and you can see on the shelf he has some of the Shore Trooper and Death Trooper, some of the Rogue One helmets are there. So that's like a little Easter egg. So he has all these different helmets and chest plates and knee pads, from all these different uniforms kind of cobbled together. And so he dons that on his way, to Kadak. And so that was kind of a neat idea too, that it adds a little more to his character. Because previously he was kind of he seemed to be this kind of like hedonistic, First Order person, very kind of flamboyant, and he had these slaves who like served him drinks while he sat on a chaise lounge, and he has Tarkin's old ship, so this is kind of adding more about who he is and why he is the way he is, which is interesting, right? I guess this is their other kind of new character that they're trying to introduce and really develop, maybe in a way similar to Afra. I don't think we're going to get a Terex comic.
Oh, come on. Terex Afra showdown. They can jump the timelines, right?
Yeah. But, this is the other, Afra being the first kind of major new original character created within the comics. And then Terex is kind of the second one, I think, of a character who was created within the comics that seems to be kind of a major part of the story. So it's interesting that it's interesting to see how they're developing him and like you said, bringing in these ideas of like, okay, he's someone who loves the Empire and he has experience like cobbling all of these things together to just try to create something new out of it and something more imposing out of it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Terex has been the real saving grace of the Poe Dameron comic. It's why I keep coming back to it. Poe isn't really even the star of his own comic. It's Terex is kind of like, but yeah, the earlier depiction of him being kind of a libertine, I could defeat Poe Dameron and his evil
Right.
You know, that kind of, he's got the little mustache and stuff like that. And it's like, he was a kind of just your mustache twirling baddie, but it's like now that we have his backstory, it's more complex. I feel like maybe he might be going to, like, he's like one of these guys where it's like something will stick in his craw forever. And it's like, well, at first I thought, well, is he going back to Jakku to pick up his old armor? Or did he already do that? Or maybe he's going back to kill the other guy. Because he's like, you know, you did kill your superior officer. I can't let that stand.
Right.
And, you know, the mole inside the Resistance is interesting. I mean, I feel like they're really telegraphing that it's going to be his buddy that he's flying with.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's, you know, and it's been done before. It was, you know, there was I think it was in the second Kevin J. Anderson Jedi Academy thing where there was a subplot where there had been a Mon Calamari character that had been like turned into kind of a Manchurian candidate by the Empire, who he framed Admiral Akbar for killing all these innocent people and kind of a very kind of like a domestic terrorist incident.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like
something similar happens in Life Dead as well.
Oh, okay. It's like never let an interesting plot twist die. I find this, in some ways, I find that the idea that C-3PO actually has a job is kind of interesting.
He's not just around.
Right.
And he still has the red arm, of course.
Yes, I have my red arm. And I'm sure you'd like to know about it, Poe. No, I don't really care. No, let me tell you about it. I was stuck on a planet with 8 droids. No, I really don't need to know.
I mean, I will say, though, that it is, you know, 3PO does talk about his, like, network of droid informants and how no one pays attention to droids and they're just considered, you know, servants or whatever. You know, reading that in light of that standalone issue about his red arm where he has that, like, deep philosophical conversation with the other droid about what being a droid means, like that was kind of like, oh, okay, so they are at least integrating that in some way that wasn't just completely out of left field.
Right. Yeah, I think that is a nice callback. I made fun of that issue, but it was kind of the thing where it's like, yeah, people wonder, it's like everybody, there is a kind of weird thing, and I don't know if it's a kind of a Lucas tick about the way he does stuff, is that, you know, they personalize the robots in these movies to the fact that some people it's their favorite character, but the way a lot of the a lot of characters, you know, Harrison, Han Solo, and even Obi-Wan Kenobi kind of treat them with disrespect, you know, just shutting them off willy-nilly, threatening to dismantle them, you know, going like, I don't remember owning a droid. Although I have a theory about that it's this kind of, I have this mental retconning about that. Why doesn't Obi-Wan recognize R2-D2? But like, I know that there's no way that 40 years ago they'd had this, but I feel like if you look at the way that Alec Guinness looks at R2-D2 when he says that, you can almost say that he's making a joke.
Right. Or like he doesn't want to reveal too much to Luke, so he's like, "What, me? I don't remember.
I don't happen to remember that. Winky
droid.
Wink. Yep. Winky wink, my old chum." But no, whatever. I mean, that's neither here nor there. But yeah, I mean, for some reason, even though I was kind of saying like, you know, I didn't like the last issue, but I liked the art, I kind of did like this issue because it was the least Poe Dameron-y of the thing.
Yeah, I kind of feel this way about maybe all of the previous arcs, where I like the way they start out. Like, I feel like they're set up well, and then they just kind of like spiral out of control. And I'm like, what? This is how it ends?
Right.
Some huge egg that hatches, and then these like Rodan monsters are fighting. Like, this is how the story ends. So I'm cautiously optimistic about this
very cautious
story arc as well. But I am going to reserve judgment until I see more.
Exactly.
And then Han Solo number 4 came out a couple weeks ago.
Yes, I forgot about that.
And issue 5, so it's a 5-issue miniseries. So issue 5 is going to come out, I think, around Thanksgiving. But But so issue 4, Han is still on the Dragon Void run. Remember, it's this big race that he's also on a mission from Leia, so he has to pick up all these rebel spies. But one of the rebel spies is an informant and a mole, and who's killing the other rebel spies. So at the very end of issue 3, they picked up one of these rebel spies who apparently has some past grudge against Chewbacca, and so issue 3 ends with this spy pointing a gun at Chewbacca. And so in the very beginning of issue 4, Lu Ray Ano, who's one of the other racers, and these Twi'lek sisters who are other racers, they show up and kind of diffuse the situation. They save Chewie from getting shot in the face. And then Lu Ray Ano has this conversation with Han Solo. Her grandmother was a map maker and helped found the Dragon Void race. Lu Ray Ano says she's the last of her kind, except for the fact that, the whole goal of this race is to create this community of pilots who, kind of support each other and everything. And so she's trying to tell Han, like, look, that you're part of this community now, and we're going to support each other. And so at that point, the race starts back up, but Han can't leave the planet yet because they're still waiting for the other rebel spy to show up. And so he's about to be disqualified when Prince Aaron, this spy, and Aaron's bodyguard show up. And so then Han gets to take off from the planet just in the nick of time, so he's not disqualified. And so, of course, they keep running into the Empire, over and over again. And so, of course, they come out of hyperspace at the next destination, and they're greeted by these Star Destroyers. Meanwhile, Prince Aaron, the spy who just showed up, he gets murdered. And I think issue 4 ends with Han seeing that he was murdered, but I don't even know if Han sees him, or if they just show him slumped over and he's shot. So I don't think anyone else has discovered that he's been murdered, but just we, the readers, know that he's been murdered.
Yeah,
and
so we know that there is a traitor on board of the Falcon right now.
Right. So, I mean, issue 5 then, well, I'll save that. But so what did you think of this issue?
I liked it. I mean, this is the one that's this is the one that's hitting all the right
honestly,
spots.
I think the Han Solo comic is the best one that they've done so far. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like there's a lot of great creatures. There's a lot of the Faline, who, people that know the Shadows of the Empire.
The bodyguard, yeah.
There's a character from that race in there, so it's nice they brought that back in there. I think that the Faline were part of the Clone Wars as well. Mm-hmm. This Prince informant, I guess, is the Zabrak, which is maybe the same race as the Darth Maul, or maybe it's just a similar race to the Darth Maul.
I think so.
But, I like anything where there's like a bunch of people on the Falcon and they're, you get to see a lot of interior stuff, and it's even the Twi'lek or Twi'lek sisters are kind of, interesting. It's like, it kind of, I know it's kind of cheesy, but it kind of reminds me of like, I think I've said this before, of like Roger Corman's Death Race 2000, that kind of thing, where it's like people are getting killed right and left, but like at the end of the day, they have to like park their vehicles and get out in a hotel, and there's all this kind of contentious interaction. And then there's, even in Death Race 2000, like one of the drivers is a spy and all this stuff, and it's kind of like, it's kind of similar in a lot of ways. Yeah. I even like this fish looking person.
Oh, Lu Ray Ano.
Yeah.
I like her design a lot too.
Which actually kind of, again, I feel like I keep bringing the old Marvel. There was a between Empire and Jedi, there was an arc about them being on a water planet. And like the creatures looked very similar to this, and that like when they were on the surface of the planet, they had to wear these weird water respirators, and then they're kind of like Mon Calamari before Mon Calamari came out, and this character looks a lot like that depiction. So I don't know if that's what it was, or it's just kind of parallel thought, but it's kind of like a nice callback. No, I like this issue a lot too. I mean, I feel like they're probably telegraphing who the killer is. I'll say one of these rebels has been like complaining the whole time and scared the whole time, and accusing everyone else of being the killer.
and that's usually a sign that like they're the one who did it.
Yeah, it's like a Duros or whatever.
Yeah, but beyond that, I mean they're doing a good job of this issue, I guess, was a little talkier than some of the others. You know, they weren't actually in the race in this issue, but aside from that, I think this comic does a good job of blending the kind of exposition and the story, and you know, the side moments, the quieter moments, like this conversation between Lou Rayano and Han Solo, with, you know, the action and the racing and, you know, fighting against the Empire and all that kind of stuff. So it's within the context of this whole series. I think this issue kind of, you know, it adds a lot, and it keeps things moving forward, but without trying to pack too much in. Now with issue 5, I'll be curious because, right, we need to finish the race and or resolve the conflict with, you know, the Empire who keeps showing up, and to find out who murdered Prince Aaron and who the mole is, who the traitor is. You need to. There's also, like, Lou Rayano has these balls of light that around her that are apparently sentient, one of whom has attached itself to Han, and so we kind of need to figure out what that is. I'm
sorry, did you say this is only a 5-issue series?
I think so.
I think you're right. Now that I'm thinking about it, man, they have a lot to.
So they kind of have they have a lot to wrap up. You know, some of it is more minor, like the balls of light thing. That's not like a major plot point, but that is at least a small mystery that they've set up over the course of these issues that you would like to see resolved. So yeah, they kind of have a lot of ground to cover. So I'm a little worried about issue 5, but the rest of it has gone so well, and it's been handled well enough that I feel like the writer, Marjorie Liu, will do a pretty good job of making sure that everything gets wrapped up, but that, you know, the pacing doesn't suffer for it.
Yeah.
But it is just a note that, like, yeah, there is a lot that they're going to have to wrap up in this. Well, like, you know, like they could have easily, as part of that conversation with Lou Rayano, they could have thrown in like, oh, and here's what those balls of light are and why this one is so attached to you. And that, you know, would have maybe helped alleviate some of the stuff they have to do in issue 5. But I think it'll be fine.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think this is the end. The 5th one is the end. It comes out it's slated for November 23rd. It's like, wow. Yeah, they did. Well, I mean, it's kind of weird how, like, they take the stuff that people really like and then they make it limited. And then the ones like,
well, I think they made it limited to begin with, and then it just kind of worked out that this one is the best.
Right. Yeah. Maybe that's when they know that they don't have forever to get their point across. They tend to cut away the stuff that might be like, this isn't really worth it. Yeah.
But I will say, though, so Leia has had her own 5-issue miniseries. Han has had his own 5-issue miniseries. Chewie's had his own 5-issue miniseries. Lando has. Darth Vader had his own kind of spin-off series. I wonder if they will give Luke his own kind of miniseries, because, I mean, the Star Wars title, it's an ensemble piece, right? Even the Rebel Jail storyline, like, he was barely in some of those issues. So I wonder if they'll give Luke his own kind of like side adventure at some point with his own miniseries, because that would kind of complete the set, as it were. But I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, maybe they're holding out for maybe they're gonna make him the linchpin of and I haven't heard any. This is just complete speculation. Maybe a Rogue Squadron series, which I think might actually end up being a lot more interesting than the Black Squadron kind of subplot that has gone in Poe Dameron.
Or even, you know, they could be waiting to kind of wrap this up, because all of this is happening in the time period between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. So I wonder if then maybe later on they'll create a Luke Skywalker comic, you know, a mini series or whatever about the time in between Empire Strikes Back and Jedi, So how did he go from being on that medical frigate with, a new mechanical hand to then suddenly him showing up at the beginning of Jedi and just like running things?
Right.
That would showing that kind of transition would
I think
maybe an interesting place for them to use that.
that's
opportunity.
definitely a good place to go. I mean, that is an interesting time when he's at his lowest of his low. And he doesn't even have a lightsaber. So, and obviously they probably love to have there's always been that story about how did Luke get his groove back? Vader got his groove back. How did Luke get his lightsaber back? Some people, the original cut of Jedi had him actually literally finishing construction moments before he placed it in the dome of R2-D2 to send him off to Jabba's palace. I think Shadows of the Empire, he didn't. I think kind of stuck with that. I don't think he might not have had a lightsaber that entire book. So it'll be interesting if they can maybe tie it into this kind of like their new, although I'm not a fan of it, they can maybe they can turn it around and make it more interesting to me. This idea of like, the crystal and the influence of the user and its refraction causes the color. And somehow they could tie it into the fact that, well, you were blue before, but now you're green, and this is what that means, and blah, blah, blah. I mean, if they're going to stick with that, I kind of feel like they might not. They might just leave it there in the book and in the Ahsoka book and not dwell on it too much, especially if they're going to be dealing with kyber crystals. I don't know what the lightsaber situation episode 8 is. Is he going to... Is he just going to say, hey, you can keep that one, I've still got mine? I mean, there's... at the end, we haven't really talked about episode 8, but I will just kind of tease this if people want to go out for their own edification. MakingStarWars.net has a kind of a rough drawing about what they think Luke looks like in episode 8, his costuming, and there is some question as to whether or not he actually uses a lightsaber at this point in his life.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see kind of, how the lightsaber lore will, considering though, like it seemed in the prequels, they had those things coming out of their behinds. They're like, hey, did you lose your lightsaber? Let me throw you one. Hey, this guy's got 50 of them in his jacket.
Maybe Luke went back to Nar Shaddaa and raided Gracchus the Hutt's old stash and just grabbed a lightsaber.
Exactly. Well, I think that's pretty good for this week.
It's a good episode in the can.
Yeah, we covered a lot of stuff. So if you want to talk to us, the email. You never use it, but you know it. I'll tell you anyway. It's hosts. It's host with an S at the end at talkingbirdcast.com. We are on Twitter at talkingbirdcast. We have a website where it's basically kind of the hub of all things Talking Bird, which is right now all things Star Wars. It's talkingbirdcast.com. And on that, you can either go to www.talkingbirdcast.com/Amazon, or you can click on one of the links on talkingbirdcast.com, which is our Amazon affiliate link. And so like if you're thinking of buying Catalyst like I am, I'm going to click on the link, even though unfortunately, since I set the account up, I can't benefit from my own purchases. But if I were to do it,
or if you were to do it, you, the listener, were to do it.
Exactly. Kicks a little bit back to us, and that Amazon pays for that. You don't pay for that. If you got a copy of Pet Sematary for $4.99 on Blu-ray, it's not going to cost you, $5.50. It's going to cost you $4.99. But then they kick back a little percentage to us, and it helps keep the show paid for and in the black. Yeah, it's in the black.
Yeah,
I don't know about finances. And we appreciate when you do that, because I know some of you people out there do it. And also, you can write us a review on iTunes. I would love a 5-star review on iTunes. We're kind of hovering at 9. I'd love a 10th, only because I found out that that's where people find out where you get up in the rankings on iTunes. It's not how many downloads you get, it's who's writing good reviews about you, and it kind of raises your profile. So if that's something you like to do, if you don't want to do it, there's no shame in that either. Half the podcasts I listen to beg for reviews, and I never do it either. So I understand the annoyance of us begging for it. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
No.
John?
Well,
Okay.
as always, thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for listening to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 64. Hopefully next week will be 65. And for Talking Birdcast, I have been Robert Zachary.
And I'm still John Llewellyn.
Thanks for listening, and may the Force be with you.